My son was asleep. My niece, Lana Wright, and her classmates carried him upstairs and threw him down. My baby died right in front of me. I lost my mind. I scooped him up and tried to rush him to the hospital, but it was already too late. He was gone before we ever made it there. Because my niece was still a minor. She barely faced any consequences. The court ordered her family to pay $800,000 in compensation. But my sister-in-law, Ariel Stone, wailed and screamed, accusing me of trying to drive them to their deaths. I cried until I felt like my heart had been torn apart. All I wanted was justice. But my husband, David Wright, and mother-in-law Karen Bailey only scolded me. Lana is just a child, too. Are you really going to destroy her life just because your son died? I never got my revenge. In the end, grief and hatred hollowed me out. That winter, I died of a heart attack. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the day of the holiday gathering. This time, I immediately called my parents and asked them to take my son away. But even then, my niece still threw a baby from upstairs. I had just sent my son away and stepped into my mother-in-law's courtyard when a loud crash exploded beside my ears. Bang! A baby wrapped tightly in a blanket slammed onto the stone tiles. I stood frozen, then slowly looked up on the second floor. My niece shot me a defiant look before turning and running away. My husband and mother-in-law rushed out after hearing the noise. The moment my mother-in-law saw what had happened, she screamed. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. My husband walked over shakily and glanced at the baby. "Nina," he said, his voice trembling. The baby isn't breathing." I didn't even dare to look. I turned and charged straight up to the second floor. My niece had locked herself inside her room. I kicked the door hard. "Lana, right? Open the door. Who did you throw down there?" There was no answer from inside the room, but I could hear my niece laughing with her classmates. "Lana, what if they call the police? My mom won't hit me, right?" "She won't. It's not like we did it on purpose. But besides, the police don't arrest minors." Their fearless words stabbed into my ears like needles. I started shaking uncontrollably. I threw all my strength into kicking that wooden door. "Get out here. Do you even understand what you just did? This is murder." My husband, who had come up a step too late, quickly grabbed me. His eyes were red as he said, "Nina, calm down. Don't scare them." I stared at him with hatred in my eyes. He had been exactly like this in my last life, too. Our son had died, and he was still worried I might scare his niece. My mother-in-law wiped her tears and said, "Lana went a little too far this time. But Nina, don't push it too much. Leo was only 3 months old. He's gone. And that's that. You two can try again and have another baby." I went completely still. It took me a few seconds to realize what she meant. They thought the dead baby was my son, but I had just handed my son over to my parents. So, who was the tiny body lying downstairs? My husband came upstairs and wrapped his arms around me. "Nina, I swear I'll get justice for Leo," he said, "but Lana is still young. She doesn't know any better." Before he could finish, I shoved him away. "What do you mean she doesn't know any better? If she's that clueless, why doesn't she jump herself?" Then I grabbed a chair and smashed it hard against the door. The wooden door rattled violently, shaking so hard it felt as if the whole house was trembling with it. "Lana Wright, get out here. If you don't, I'll break this door down." Why should she get to kill someone and act like nothing happened? Even if the baby who died today wasn't mine, I was still going to get justice for him. When she saw how hard I was smashing the door, my niece shouted from inside, "Stop. If you keep hitting it, I'll jump." I was panting from the effort. I turned, rushed into the kitchen, grabbed a chef's knife and hacked it into the door. The blade sank deep into the wood and wouldn't come loose. "Then jump. If you don't, I'll get in there and beat you myself." My niece finally couldn't take the pressure anymore and opened the door. She looked irritated and bored, as if none of this had anything to do with her. "Who did you throw down there?" She lifted her chin and rocked lazily on her feet, looking completely unconcerned. "Your son. Who else?" I slapped her across the face. The sharp crack snapped her head to the side. Tears instantly filled my niece's eyes. She clutched her face and stared at me in disbelief. "What right do you have to hit me? Even my mom doesn't dare hit me." "You bitch." I slapped her again. "That's exactly why you turned into such a spoiled little monster. Your mother never taught you right from wrong." Then I grabbed her by the collar and shouted through gritted teeth, "I'll ask you one more time. Who did you throw downstairs this time?" My niece finally quieted down, covering her face. She said, "It was Leo, but I didn't mean to do it. I just wanted to see what would happen if he fell. I didn't think he would die." I looked into the room. The window was wide open and the cold wind came rushing in. My niece's classmates, huddled by the bed, too scared to say a word. They were already in elementary school. How could they not know this was dangerous? My husband tried to reason with me. Lana already admitted she was wrong. Honey, you vented enough. Let's just bury the baby. I found it absurd. A life was gone, and all she had to do was say she was sorry. My mother-in-law rushed up and wrapped her arms around my niece, stroking her face with heartache. She muttered, "You hit her so hard. Look, her little face is all red." Her face was only red from a slap, but that baby had lost his entire life. I shoved my mother-in-law away, grabbed my niece by the hair, and dragged her toward the window. "Didn't you say you didn't know what would happen if someone fell? Why don't you try it yourself?" My niece burst into tears, struggling as she cried. "No, I don't want to. I'll die if I fall. You'll go to jail. If you kill me, you'll go to jail." So she didn't know people could go to jail, and she did it anyway, in both lifetimes. I could never understand how a child's heart could be this cruel. Pain shot through my arm. My husband yanked me away, and the force sent my head slamming into the wall. Warm blood trickled down the wall. My husband stood protectively in front of my niece, his face full of disgust. "Are you done yet? Our son is already dead. Why are you taking it out on a child? Maybe you should have watched him better." He and my mother-in-law both stood in front of my niece, guarding her from me. In my last life, I had already figured it out. They were the real family bound by blood. My 3-month-old son, and I meant nothing. I pressed a hand to my forehead, trembling as I took out my phone to call the police. But my husband kicked it out of my hand. "This is a family matter. Why are you calling the police? Lana isn't even 18 yet. Calling the police won't do anything." I braced myself against the wall and stood up, looking at him in utter disappointment. "The one who died is your son, and you still won't do anything?" When he saw the blood on my forehead, a flicker of guilt crossed his eyes. "Nina, we can have another child. But I only have one niece." What a good man. So devoted to his family. Back then, that was exactly what I had liked about him. He was filial. He treated his family well. I never imagined that same quality would become. The blade pointed at me. He had never once seen my son and me as his real family. In his heart, only his own blood relatives mattered. Even his niece mattered more than his biological son. I turned to go downstairs, but my sister-in-law rushed over and shouldered past me. She threw herself toward Lana and wrapped her arms around her. Furious. "What gives you the right to hit my daughter? I can't even bear to hit her myself. Who do you think you are?" I was shaking with rage. "Why don't you ask what your daughter did? Your son died, and now you're blaming my daughter? If you want to blame someone, blame your son for being unlucky." I hated them so much, but right now, all I could think about was the baby, who had just fallen from upstairs. Who was he? How would he ended up in my mother-in-law's house? "Ariel, you have a child too. If the one who died today had been your child, would you still be able to say that?" My sister-in-law's pupils shrank. She pointed at me and cursed. "You shameless lunatic. Your son died. So now you're cursing my family, aren't you? If you ask me, your son deserved to die. Good riddance." I grabbed my phone with its shattered screen and headed straight downstairs. My mother-in-law shouted anxiously, "Stop her. She's going to call the police." My sister-in-law sneered. "So what if she does? Ariana won't go to prison anyway. Are you stupid? If she calls the police and sues us, we'll have to pay compensation." Ariel suddenly understood, and the disgust on her face deepened. "David, look at the wife you married. Her own son is dead, and she still has the energy to scheme against us." My husband chased after me, his face dark with anger. But I had already sent a text to my parents, telling them to call the police. He lunged forward to snatch my phone. When he saw the message I had sent, he was so furious that he slapped me across the face. "I told you this is a family matter. Why do you insist on calling the police? My brother's family isn't well off to begin with. Are you trying to extort them? How did I never realize you were this vicious?" I clutched my chest and let out a hopeless laugh. Yes, I was vicious. I hated them so much. I wished their whole family would die, without saying a word. I kept walking downstairs. I needed to know who that baby was. A vague answer had already formed in my heart, but I didn't dare believe it. When I ignored him, David panicked and followed me downstairs. Just as I was about to step outside, he grabbed my shoulders tightly. "Nina, stop making a scene, okay? I already checked Leo. He's gone. Let's bury him and pretend none of this ever happened, all right?" I pushed him away without expression, but in the next second, my pupils shrank. The spot where the baby had been lying was now empty. I grabbed David by the collar and demanded, "Where's the baby? What did you do with him?" Police sirens sounded outside the courtyard. 2 officers walked in and asked who called the police. David clamped a hand over my mouth and forced out a smile. "Officers, my wife made a mistake. No one called the police." My mother-in-law and Ariel hurried downstairs. 2. My mother-in-law pointed at me and snapped, "She's crazy. It was just an argument between husband and wife." but she wants to call the police over every little family issue. The officers looked doubtful, but they seemed to think it was just a domestic dispute. They took a brief statement and left. Only after the police were completely gone did David finally let go of me. Nina, do you think I'm not devastated that the baby is dead? But if you insist on making this public, how is Lana supposed to face her classmates afterward? And what will people think of our family? I wiped the cold tears from my face. Is any of that worth more than a life? I looked around searching for the baby, but he was nowhere to be found. I searched every corner of the house, but I couldn't find the child who had died. Then my gaze landed on the outhouse. When Ariel saw me heading toward it, she quickly grabbed me. The outhouse toilet is broken. Go somewhere else. I shook her off coldly and walked toward the outhouse. A foul stench hit me in the face. Then I saw a corner of the bright red baby blanket in there. My whole body shook. A furious, broken roar tore from my chest. Are you people even human? I lunged forward, desperate to reach into the pit, but David's iron grip clamped onto my shoulders from behind, dragging me backward. Nina, stop it. Have you lost your mind? He hissed, his voice a frantic, hushed whisper. It's over. Leo is gone. Do you want the whole neighborhood to hear you? Do you want to ruin our family's reputation forever? Ariel stood by the outhouse door, her arms crossed, a smug, chilling sneer plastered across her face. Let her scream, David. Who is going to believe a lunatic? Besides, if I hadn't been smart enough to hide the body, she would have used her own dead son to extort my family for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Once someone is dead, they're just a useless lump of clay. We don't have the money to pay her anyway. Lana, standing safely behind her mother, chimed in with a venomous giggle. Exactly. Aunt Nina is so shameless. Your son was only 3 months old, and you're already trying to squeeze a fortune out of us. What? Were you planning to get rich every time you popped out a baby? Hearing these sickening words, the memories of my previous life crashed over me like tidal waves of ice-cold water. In my last life, they had driven me to my grave with their heartless taunts. And now, they were doing it again, except this time, the monster they had raised had devoured one of their own. You're sick, I whispered, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound disgust. All of you are monsters. Watch your mouth, Nina. Ariel snapped. She stepped forward and shoved me hard. My heel caught on a loose stone, and I tumbled onto the cold, hard ground of the courtyard. Before I could even push myself up, Lana dashed forward. With a face twisted in cruel delight, she raised her heavy boot and kicked me hard, right in my lower abdomen. A sharp, blinding agony flared through my body. The kick had landed directly on the still tender scar from my C-section. I gasped, biting my lips so hard that the metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. I looked up at David, pleading with my eyes for even a shred of humanity, hoping he might step in to protect his wife. But he didn't even blink. He merely wrapped an arm around Ariel's shoulders to comfort her, casting a brief, indifferent glance at me. How much strength can a child really have, Nina? Stop being so dramatic, David said casually, his voice devoid of any warmth. You scared Lana so badly upstairs. Just let her blow off some steam. It's not like your son can feel anything anymore. Lana laughed, emboldened by her uncle's approval. She kicked me in the stomach again, harder this time. Your son deserved to die. He deserved to die. Who the hell said my grandson is dead? A furious, thunderous roar shattered the quiet of the courtyard. The heavy iron gates of the courtyard were violently thrown open, slamming against the stone walls. My father marched in, his face crimson with rage, his hands balled into tight fists. Behind him came my mother, tears streaming down her face, cradling a bundle wrapped tightly in a soft, baby blue blanket. And from within that blue blanket came a tiny, sharp, beautifully loud cry. It was Leo. He was alive. He was breathing. He was safe. At the sight of my parents and the unmistakable sound of a healthy baby's cry, David's entire family went deathly pale. And Nina. David stammered, his eyes darting frantically between me, my mother, and the blue bundle. How is Leo? My mother rushed over to me, kneeling in the dirt to help me up. She pressed her face against mine, weeping. Nina, thank God. We got your text and called the police immediately. We brought Leo back with us. He's completely safe. My father stood like a guardian wall between us and the Wright family. He glared at David, his voice shaking with pure hatred. You worthless piece of trash. You let your niece kick your wife, who just gave birth? You stood by while they insulted her. But Ariel didn't care about my father's anger. Her eyes were locked onto the crying baby in my mother's arms. Her breath hitched, her pupils shrinking to the size of pinpricks. If that's Leo, Ariel whispered, her voice suddenly losing all of its smug confidence, replaced by a high-pitched, trembling dread. Then who? She couldn't finish the sentence. She slowly turned her head toward the outhouse, her gaze landing on the corner of the bright red blanket peeking out from the filthy depths. Just then, the wail of police sirens grew deafeningly loud outside the courtyard. Several police cruisers pulled up, and a dozen officers rushed through the gates, their guns drawn and flashlights cutting through the dim twilight. "Nobody move. We received a report of a homicide," the lead officer shouted. I pointed a shaking, blood-stained finger toward the outhouse. "Officer, they threw a baby from the second floor. They hid the body in the outhouse toilet to cover up the crime." David tried to step in front of the officers, forcing a sweating, terrified smile. "Officers, please, this is a misunderstanding. It's just a family dispute. Step aside," the officer barked, shoving David out of the way. Two officers immediately went to the outhouse. It took them several agonizing minutes of careful retrieval, but eventually they emerged. In their arms was the bright red blanket, now covered in filth and stained with blood. The lead officer gently pulled back a corner of the fabric to check for vitals, revealing a small, lifeless face. The infant's skull was severely fractured from the impact of the fall. The moment the blanket was parted, Ariel let out a strangled, horrific scream that didn't sound human. It was a sound of absolute, soul-shattering agony. "Mason," she shrieked, her legs instantly giving out beneath her. She collapsed into the dirt, clawing at her own face as her eyes rolled back into her head. She fainted on the spot. Lana dropped to her knees beside her mother, staring at the lifeless body of the baby. She burst into hysterical tears, shaking her head violently.
No.
"How could it be my brother? I don't believe it. I clearly threw that little bastard. I threw Leo. Why is it Mason?" A cold, mocking laugh bubbled up from my throat, though tears of grief for the innocent child washed down my cheeks. I walked over to Lana, looking down at her like she was a venomous insect. "Lana Wright, what did my son ever do to you? You wanted him dead so badly that you didn't even bother to look at the face of the baby you snatched from the crib. You just saw a baby sleeping in my room and threw him out." The truth was simple, yet utterly devastating. When I had sent my parents away with Leo, I had left the house for a brief moment. Ariel had brought her own 3-month-old son, Mason, to the holiday gathering. Because she was busy gossiping downstairs with my mother-in-law, she had placed Mason in the second-floor crib, the very crib where Leo usually slept. Lana, fueled by her classmates' dares and her own innate, rotting malice, had snuck upstairs to kill my son. She didn't care about the baby's life. She only wanted to see what would happen if he fell. In her eager rush to commit murder, she grabbed the baby wrapped in the red blanket, never realizing she was holding her own baby brother. "My baby, my sweet baby," Karen Bailey, my mother-in-law, wailed, falling to her knees and rocking back and forth. "Lana, you foolish girl. What did you do? You killed your own brother." Lana hid behind her grandmother, trembling with fear, her face pale as a sheet. She didn't dare say another word as the police officers stepped forward, placing her and her classmates in handcuffs. Because Lana was over 10 years old, she was old enough to face juvenile detention for manslaughter, if not outright murder. As the officers began wrapping Ariel and David in handcuffs for harboring a fugitive and destroying evidence, Ariel suddenly regained consciousness. She looked at the handcuffs around her wrists, then at the body of her son being loaded into a black body bag. Her grief instantly curdled into a manic, psychotic rage. She locked her eyes on me and began screaming, thrashing against the officers holding her. "You bitch. You did this on purpose." Ariel shrieked, her face contorted like a demon. "You switched your son out. You knew Lana was going to do it, so you set this up to kill my Mason. You murdered my boy." I let out a cold, hollow laugh. "Did I make your daughter sneak upstairs? Did I force her to carry a 3-month-old baby to the balcony and hurl him onto the stone tiles? Ariel, your daughter is rotten to the core, and you are the one who watered her roots. This is your karma." The neighbors who had gathered around the courtyard gates began pointing and whispering, their voices filled with disgust. My God, what a horrific family. The daughter killed her own baby brother. And they tried to hide the body in the toilet to save their own skins. Even animals wouldn't do something so vile. Truly, karma has eyes. David, his hands cuffed behind his back, looked at the crowd of onlookers and then turned to me, his face dark with fury. "Nina, do you see what you've done? You've ruined our family. If Ariel goes to prison, I will never forgive you." I walked up to David, staring directly into the eyes of the man I had once loved, the man who had let me die of a broken heart in my past life. "I don't need your forgiveness, David," I whispered coldly, "because from this moment on, you are nothing to me." The weeks following the holiday gathering were a whirlwind of legal battles and public outrage. The story of the courtyard baby murder spread like wildfire online. Someone had recorded a video of the police retrieving little Mason's body from the outhouse, along with Ariel's manic confession that she had hidden the body to avoid paying compensation. The internet exploded with fury. David's family became the most hated people in the country. Their names, addresses, and workplaces were leaked. David, who was a junior partner at a reputable law firm, was promptly fired. No firm wanted to be associated with a man who had helped hide his nephew's murdered body in a toilet. But for me, this was only the beginning. I had moved back into my parents' house with Leo. Every time I looked at his chubby, smiling face, my heart swelled with gratitude. I had saved him. I had broken the cycle. But the hatred inside me for the Wright family had not yet been fully quenched. They had to pay for what they did to me in both lifetimes. One evening, as I was reading through the thousands of hate comments on a viral video about David's family, a particular comment caught my eye. Look at the brother and the sister-in-law. The way David was comforting Ariel instead of his own wife. Are we sure they are just in-laws? Someone should look into their relationship. My breath hitched. In my past life, I had always felt an underlying tension between David and Ariel. David was always overly protective of her, always prioritizing her and Lana over me and Leo. At the time, I had chalked it up to his devotion to his family. But now, with a cleared mind and a second chance at life, the puzzle pieces began to slide into place. I stood up, walked to the drawer, and pulled out a small plastic bag containing several strands of hair I had secretly gathered from David's hairbrush and Lana's jacket before I left the house. I took a deep breath, drove to a private forensic clinic, and submitted them for a paternity test. 2 weeks later, the results arrived in a sealed white envelope. I sat in my car, my heart pounding against my ribs as I tore the envelope open. My eyes scanned the legal jargon until they landed on the conclusion at the bottom of the page. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. The tested male, David Wright, cannot be excluded as the biological father of the tested female, Lana Wright. I let out a long, slow breath. A cold, victorious smile spread across my face. Lana wasn't David's niece. She was his biological daughter. David had slept with his own brother Tom's wife, Ariel, 10 years ago, and they had kept the secret hidden from everyone, especially from Tom, who was a hardworking, albeit dim-witted, blue-collar worker who doted on Lana like she was his own flesh and blood. Oh, David. Ariel, I whispered, clutching the paper. You wanted to protect your precious family? Let's see how much of it is left when I'm done. Before I could unleash the paternity report, my mother-in-law, Karen Bailey, made a move of her own. To my shock, she hadn't given up on trying to spin the narrative. She and Ariel were desperate to get Lana out of juvenile detention and to avoid the massive civil lawsuits heading their way. One afternoon, my mother-in-law arrived at my parents' house. But she didn't come alone. She brought David, Ariel, and a heavily bruised, weeping Lana, whom they had managed to get out on temporary medical bail. The moment she stepped through the door, Karen kicked Lana hard behind the knee. Kneel down, Karen barked. Kneel down and apologize to your aunt. Lana hit the hardwood floor with a loud crack, tears streaming down her dusty face. She knocked her forehead against the ground 3 times, sobbing hysterically. Aunt Nina, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please don't sue us. Please tell the police to drop the charges. I stood in the living room, my arms crossed, watching the pathetic display. My parents stood behind me, their faces grim. Get up, I said coldly. I'm not dead yet. What are you bowing like that for? Karen rubbed her hands together, a sickeningly sweet smile on her face. Nina, my dear, look. Lana has realized her mistake. David and Ariel have both been punished enough. David lost his job, and Ariel is practically grieving herself to death over poor Mason. We are all one family, aren't we? Let's just put this behind us. Put a child's murder behind us, my father roared, stepping forward. Are you out of your mind, old woman? It was a murder. It was an accident. Ariel screamed from the doorway, her eyes red and puffy. Lana didn't mean to do it. She's just a child. She's 10 years old, Ariel. She knew exactly what she was doing. She wanted to kill my son. I replied, my voice dangerously calm. And you helped hide the body of your own child to frame me. Do you really think an apology is going to fix this? David stepped forward, his expression a mix of desperation and anger. Nina, be reasonable. If you press charges and demand civil damages, you will destroy Lana's future. Do you really want to lock up a child? We can start over. We can have another baby, I swear. Just drop the lawsuit against Ariel and Lana. I looked at David, disgust rising in my throat. This was the man I had loved. He was willing to sacrifice his own wife, his own living son, and his entire moral compass just to protect his precious sister-in-law and her daughter. No, I said flatly. I will see you all in court. David's face darkened. Fine. If you want to play dirty, don't blame us for fighting back. They did fight back, and they did it in the most disgusting way possible. A few days later, my mother-in-law and Ariel targeted Lana's classmate, a 10-year-old girl named Yuna. Yuna had been in the room with Lana when the incident occurred, too terrified to speak up. Karen Bailey and Ariel went straight to Yuna's parents' small manufacturing factory. They brought a massive, bright red banner that read, "Yuna is a murderer. Justice for baby Mason." They set up a tripod and started a live stream on TikTok right outside the factory gates. Karen wailed into the camera, squeezing out fake tears. "My poor grandson Mason was murdered. This evil girl, Yuna, forced my innocent granddaughter Lana to throw him out of the window. She threatened Lana. My granddaughter is a victim. Please, everyone, help us get justice." The live stream quickly gained traction. Because the public was already highly invested in the case, the viewer count soared into the hundreds of thousands. Ariel joined in, screaming at the factory workers. "Yuna's parents are corrupt capitalists. They are using their money to shield their murdered daughter, while my family is ruined. Look at my poor Lana. She's traumatized." Somehow, the fickle internet actually began to believe them. The comment section started shifting. "I knew a 10-year-old couldn't be cruel enough to kill her own baby brother. It must have been peer pressure. The classmate is the real mastermind. Look how quiet she's been. The aunt who called the police seems shady too. Why did she switch the babies? She probably wanted this to happen." Under the relentless pressure of public shaming and a boycott of their factory, Yuna's parents eventually broke down. They were simple, honest people who couldn't handle the massive wave of online hate. To save their daughter and their business, they agreed to a private settlement. They paid Karen and Ariel $800,000 in compensation. But my mother-in-law and Ariel weren't satisfied. Seeing how easy it was to extract money, they demanded another $200,000, threatening to continue the live stream protests until they received a full $1,000,000. "Is $800,000 enough to buy my grandson's life?" Karen yelled into the camera during a follow-up stream. "I'm telling you, it has to be at least $1,000,000. Otherwise, we will never stop." I watched the live stream from my computer, my fingers clutching the desk until my knuckles turned white. They were using the tragic death of their own child, a baby they had stuffed into a toilet pit, to extort an innocent family for $1,000,000. They were utterly irredeemable. "You want $1,000,000? I whispered to the empty room, a cold laugh escaping my lips. "I'll give you something worth much, much more." I picked up my phone and called Tom Wright, David's older brother and Ariel's husband. Tom had been working out of state for the past few weeks, completely unaware of the inner workings of the tragedy, only knowing that his son Mason had died in a tragic accident and that his daughter Lana was in trouble. "Tom," I said when he answered, his voice heavy with grief. "It's Nina. I need you to come to my mother-in-law's house tonight. Bring Ariel and David. I have the compensation money from Yuna's family, and I want to settle everything once and for all." "Really, Nina?" Tom asked, a glimmer of hope in his tired voice. "You'll help us?" "Yes," I smiled. "I will help you see the truth." That evening, the living room of Karen Bailey's house was packed. My mother-in-law sat on the plush sofa, looking triumphant. Ariel sat next to her, clutching a designer handbag she had likely bought with the first installment of Yuna's parents' money. David stood by the fireplace, his chest puffed out, thinking they had finally defeated me. Tom sat in the corner, looking exhausted and broken, his eyes red from crying over his dead son. Lana sat on a small stool, looking smug once again, believing her grandmother's wealth would protect her from any jail time. Even Yuna's parents were there, having been dragged along by Karen to deliver the final $200,000. They looked terrified, holding a black briefcase containing the cash. I walked into the room, accompanied by my father and a legal assistant. Nina," Karen sneered, not even bothering to hide her greed anymore. "You finally realized that you can't fight us. Where is the contract? Once Yuna's parents pay the remaining $200,000, we will sign the agreement and take down the videos." I ignored her. I walked straight over to Tom. "Tom," I said gently, "you've been working so hard to support this family. You doted on Lana and you worked double shifts to pay for her private tutoring. You loved Mason with all your heart." "Of course I did, Nina," Tom sighed, burying his face in his hands. "They were my life. And now my boy is gone." "Do you know why your boy is gone, Tom?" I asked, my voice echoing in the quiet room. "Nina, don't start this again," David snapped, stepping forward aggressively. "The police already ruled it an accident. Stop harassing my family." "Shut up, David," my father growled, stepping in front of him. I pulled the white envelope from my bag and handed it directly to Tom. "What is this?" Tom asked, frowning as he took the paper. "It's a paternity test, Tom," I said, looking directly at Ariel, whose face instantly drained of all color. "I took hair samples from Lana and David. I think you deserve to know who you've really been working yourself to the bone for." "Nina, no!" Ariel shrieked, lunging across the coffee table to snatch the paper. But my father grabbed her arm, pinning her down. Tom's brow furrowed. With trembling hands, he unfolded the paper. He read the lines slowly, his eyes moving back and forth across the page. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. Then, Tom's pupils shrank. The paper fluttered from his hands, but he caught it, crushing the paternity test in his fist until his knuckles turned white. Tom, listen to me," David stammered, his face turning pale as he began backing away toward the door. "Ariel and we only did it once, it was a mistake, I swear." "You bastard," Tom roared. The sound that came out of Tom was pure, unadulterated primal fury. He lunged across the room like a wild animal, his massive, heavy-set frame slamming David into the brick fireplace. Crack. Tom's fist connected with David's jaw, sending a spray of blood across the white mantelpiece. "You're my own brother," Tom screamed, his voice cracking with betrayal. "My own brother. And you slept with my wife. For 10 years. You let me raise your bastard child. You let me pay for her clothes, her school, her food." "Tom, stop. You'll kill him," Karen screamed, rushing forward to pull Tom off David. But Tom was unstoppable. He threw his mother back onto the sofa and turned back to David, raining punch after punch onto his face. David's nose shattered, his eyes swelling shut within seconds. He tried to scramble away, but with one of his legs pinned under Tom's heavy knee, he couldn't move. The living room had turned into a literal battlefield. My mother-in-law ran into the kitchen and emerged holding a heavy kitchen knife, crying and stamping her feet in utter panic. "What is this? What kind of sin is this? How can two brothers fight over one woman? Stop it. Tom, stop hitting your brother." Ariel was on her knees, crying and begging. "Tom, please. I'm sorry. It was 10 years ago. It was a mistake." Lana, terrified by the violence, ran over and hugged Tom's leg, crying hysterically. Daddy, stop hitting Uncle David. I still want to live in his big house. He promised to buy me a piano." Hearing Lana call David uncle while begging to live in his house was the final straw for Tom. He looked down at the girl he had loved as his daughter, the girl who had murdered his actual biological son, Mason, out of pure, unchecked malice. Tom let out a guttural laugh of pure madness. He raised his heavy boot and kicked Lana right in the chest, sending her flying backward into the coffee table. Smash. The glass table shattered into 1,000 pieces. Lana screamed as the sharp shards sliced into her arms and face. "Get away from me, you little monster." Tom roared at Lana. "You're not my daughter. You're a murderer. You killed my Mason. You killed my only real son because you wanted to murder Nina's baby." Yuna's parents stood by the door, completely stunned by the unfolding horror. I turned to Yuna's father and pointed at the briefcase of money. "Pick it up. And call the police. Right now." He nodded frantically, grabbing the briefcase and dialing 911. Within minutes, the police arrived once again. But this time, they weren't here for a domestic dispute. They were here for assault, extortion, and the reopening of a murder investigation. Tom was pulled off David by 3 officers. David lay on the floor, his face a bloody, unrecognizable pulp, groaning in agony. Ariel was arrested on the spot for complicity in extortion and for harboring a minor who had committed homicide. Karen Bailey, holding the kitchen knife, was disarmed and cuffed for threatening behavior and extortion. Lana, covered in blood and glass scratches, was loaded into an ambulance under police guard. Her medical bail was officially revoked. Because the truth of the extortion and the murder was now fully exposed, she would be facing the maximum sentence in a juvenile correctional facility. As the police dragged Ariel past me, she stopped. Her hair was wild, her makeup smeared, looking like a hollow shell of a human. "You planned this, Nina," she whispered, her voice dead and flat. "You knew everything. You brought us to this." I looked at her, my expression completely serene. "I didn't make your daughter a killer, Ariel. I didn't make you sleep with your husband's brother. I didn't make you extort an innocent family," I said softly. "You built this hell for yourselves. I only turned on the lights so the world could see it." The aftermath of that night was swift and devastating. The video of the fight, along with the paternity test results, was leaked online by an anonymous source, my father's legal assistant. The public backlash was unlike anything the town had ever seen. The Wright family's reputation was utterly demolished. David Wright's injuries left him permanently disfigured. He lost his teeth, his jaw had to be wired shut, and he was left with a permanent limp. More importantly, he lost his license to practice law due to his criminal charges of harboring a fugitive, destroying evidence, and conspiracy to extort. He was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Ariel Stone was sentenced to 8 years for her role in the extortion and the cover-up of Mason's death. Karen Bailey's house was seized to pay for the legal fees and the massive civil lawsuit I filed against them for the emotional distress and physical assault I had suffered. She was forced to move into a state-run nursing home, penniless and alone, hated by both of her surviving sons. Tom divorced Ariel immediately. He packed his bags and left the state, cutting all ties with the Wright family. He was the only one I felt any pity for, but at least he was free from the web of lies that had suffocated his life. Lana Wright was sentenced to a juvenile detention facility until her 18th birthday. With her record, her scarred face, and the global infamy of her actions, her life was effectively ruined before it had even truly begun. As for me, I stood in the quiet courtyard of my parents' beautiful home, holding Leo in my arms. The winter wind was cold, but it didn't pierce my chest anymore. The hollow, freezing grief that had killed me in my past life was gone, replaced by the warm, steady heartbeat of my living son. I looked up at the gray winter sky, letting a single snowflake land on my cheek. "We did it, Leo," I whispered, kissing his soft forehead. "We're safe." I had gotten my justice. Not through blood, and not through becoming a monster like them. I had simply let their own rotten natures consume them. I turned and walked back into the warm, brightly lit house, closing the door on the cold winter behind me.